She walked into that glittering ballroom, pregnant, heartbroken, and holding the one thing that would destroy them all, the truth. He thought she'd cry. He thought she'd beg. He thought wrong. This is the story of how a millionaire's betrayal became his biggest mistake and how one woman's grace became her greatest weapon. Stay until the end, because what she does next will leave you speechless. I'm your name, and this is the millionaire's betrayal. The illusion of love. The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers as Alexander Reed surveyed his empire with satisfaction. At 38, he'd built his fortune from nothing, transforming a small tech startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. Tonight's charity gala was another testament to his success, filled with Manhattan's elite celebrating his latest achievement. "You're magnificent tonight, darling," Chloe Bennett whispered, her crimson lips curving into a smile that promised adventure. She pressed against him, her designer gown shimmering like liquid gold. "You deserve someone who truly understands your brilliance." Alexander's pulse quickened. Chloe was everything Emma wasn't: bold, ambitious, hungry for the spotlight. She made him feel alive in ways his marriage no longer did. Emma had grown predictable, content with quiet dinners and her charity work. She didn't understand the rush of closing deals or the thrill of conquest. "Where's your wife?" someone asked, breaking his reverie. "Home," Alexander replied curtly. "She's been feeling unwell lately." What he didn't mention was Emma's tearful plea that morning. "Please, Alex, we need to talk. It's important." He dismissed her concerns, claiming tonight was too crucial for his business reputation. Across town, Emma Reed sat alone in their penthouse, one hand resting on her barely visible pregnancy bump. She'd discovered she was 8 weeks pregnant the same week she'd noticed the lipstick, stains, and perfume traces that weren't hers. The truth had shattered her world, but Emma wasn't the fragile woman Alexander believed her to be. Her trembling fingers opened a leather portfolio containing documents she'd spent weeks gathering: bank statements, emails, corporate records. Each page told a story of deception far deeper than a simple affair. Tonight, Alexander thought he was celebrating his success. He had no idea his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The mask slips. Alexander couldn't keep his hands off Chloe as they danced, oblivious to the disapproving glances from older society members. She'd become his obsession over the past 3 months, filling his thoughts during board meetings and haunting his dreams at night. "I have a surprise for you," Chloe murmured, her emerald eyes gleaming with calculated affection. "My company wants to partner with Reed Enterprises. Imagine what we could build together, professionally and personally." He'd already signed preliminary agreements with Bennett Global Solutions, eager to intertwine their businesses as deeply as their bodies. Chloe had presented the deal as mutually beneficial, and he'd been too intoxicated by her attention to conduct his usual thorough investigation. "You've changed my life," Alexander confessed, spinning her dramatically. "I never knew I could feel this way again." "Then leave her," Chloe whispered urgently. "Emma doesn't appreciate you." "I do. Announce it tonight. Tell everyone you've chosen me." Meanwhile, Emma stood before her bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with steady hands despite her racing heart. She dressed carefully in a navy silk gown that concealed her pregnancy while accentuating her grace. The folder sat on her bed, packed with evidence her private investigator had compiled. Her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer. "Everything's ready. Are you certain about this?" Emma's reflection stared back, tired eyes that had cried too many tears, but a jaw set with newfound determination. She thought of the baby growing inside her, the child who would never know a father who valued appearances over authenticity. "I'm certain," she typed back. At the gala, Alexander clinked his champagne glass, commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement." The ballroom doors swung open. Emma Reed walked in, her presence commanding instant silence. She moved through the crowd like royalty, her composure unshakable. Alexander's face drained of color. "Emma, what are you—" "Continue, darling," Emma said smoothly, her voice carrying across the stunned room. "Don't let me interrupt your important announcement." The truth unveiled. Alexander's confident smile faltered as Emma approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor with rhythmic precision. Chloe's grip on his arm tightened possessively, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo sleeve. "Emma, this isn't the time," Alexander hissed, trying to maintain his composure before 300 witnesses. "We'll discuss whatever's bothering you at home." "Oh, but this concerns everyone here," Emma replied, her voice honey-sweet yet edged with steel. She held up the leather folder and several board members shifted uncomfortably. "Especially your investors and business partners." Chloe's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing something cold beneath her seductive mask. "Alexander, who is this woman crashing our celebration?" The room erupted in whispers. Everyone knew exactly who Emma was. "I'm his wife," Emma said calmly, "though I suspect that detail has become inconvenient lately." She turned to address the crowd, projecting confidence she'd cultivated through sleepless nights of preparation. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I've discovered information that affects many people in this room financially." "Emma, stop this," Alexander warned, his voice rising with panic he couldn't quite hide. She opened the folder, extracting the first document. "For the past 3 months, Bennett Global Solutions has been systematically draining funds from Reed Enterprises through fraudulent contracts, shell companies, inflated invoices, phantom consulting fees. It's quite sophisticated, actually." Gas rippled through the crowd. Chloe's face transformed from shock to fury. "That's slander. Alexander, are you going to let her—" "I have bank records," Emma continued, distributing copies to several board members who rushed forward. "Emails between Ms. Bennett and her associates discussing the timeline for bankrupting my husband. Text messages revealing that this—" She gestured between Alexander and Chloe. "Romantic entanglement was orchestrated specifically to blind him to the embezzlement." Alexander snatched the document, his hands trembling as he scanned the evidence. Transaction codes he'd approved without question, meetings with Chloe's business associates who didn't exist, his signature authorizing transfers to accounts he'd never verified. "You used me," he whispered, turning to Chloe with dawning horror. "This was never real." Chloe's laugh was sharp and brittle. "You made it so easy, Alexander. A few compliments, some attention, and you handed me everything. Did you really think someone like me would want you for anything but your money?" The words struck like physical blows. Around them, security guards moved forward as board members made urgent phone calls to lawyers and accountants. Emma watched her husband's world collapse with detached sympathy. She'd once loved this man desperately enough to excuse his growing arrogance and neglect. Now she felt only pity. "The authorities have been notified," she announced quietly. "I've also filed for divorce. The papers are being served tomorrow." Alexander reached for her, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. "Emma, please. I was a fool. We can fix this." "No," she said simply, stepping back. "We can't." As security escorted a screaming Chloe away, Emma placed one final document in Alexander's shaking hands. An ultrasound image showing a tiny form curled peacefully in darkness. "You're going to be a father," she said softly, seeing genuine anguish finally break through his shock. "But you threw away your chance to be a dad." She walked away without looking back, leaving Alexander Reed surrounded by wreckage of his own making. A fortune compromised, a reputation shattered, and a family lost forever. Outside, Emma breathed the cool night air, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. The hardest part was over. Now she could finally begin again. Ashes and beginnings. 3 months had passed since the gala that destroyed Alexander Reed's carefully constructed life. The scandal had dominated headlines for weeks. Tech mogul duped by femme fatale. Wall Street's biggest con. How love made a billionaire blind. Chloe Bennett was awaiting trial for fraud and embezzlement, her accomplices scattered across international borders. Alexander sat in his downtown office, which felt cavernous now that half his staff had been laid off. The company had survived barely, but his reputation lay in ruins. Board members who once sought his advice now questioned his every decision. Friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with such spectacular foolishness. His phone rang, Emma's lawyer again. "Mr. Reed, we need your signature on the final custody arrangements. Mrs. Reed has been more than generous, considering—" "I know," Alexander interrupted hoarsely. He'd spent weeks begging for another chance through intermediaries. Each plea returned unopened. Emma had granted him supervised visitation rights once the baby arrived, but nothing more. Her mercy felt worse than hatred. He'd hired investigators who reported back with details that twisted the knife deeper. Emma had moved to a brownstone in Brooklyn, purchased with money from her late father's trust. Funds Alexander never knew existed because he'd never bothered asking about her life. She'd launched a consulting firm helping small businesses with ethical investment strategies, her client list growing through word-of-mouth praise. "She's thriving," his investigator had said almost apologetically. "Glowing, actually. People love her." Meanwhile, Alexander was haunted by memories he dismissed as mundane. Emma laughing at his terrible jokes, Emma supporting him through his first major deal, Emma believing in him when he was nobody. He'd traded substance for sparkle and lost everything that mattered. His assistant knocked hesitantly. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." "She says it's urgent." Alexander looked up, hope flaring irrationally. But the woman who entered wasn't Emma. She was younger, nervous, clutching an envelope. "Mr. Reed, I'm Sarah Chen from the district attorney's office. Ms. Bennett has agreed to testify against her co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed something else. She targeted you specifically because of your wife." Alexander frowned. "What do you mean?" Emma Reed inherited a significant trust fund and property portfolio from her father, Maxwell Harrison. Bennett Global Solutions had tried unsuccessfully to acquire some of those properties years ago. When Ms. Bennett discovered Emma had married you, she saw an opportunity for revenge, destroy your marriage, bankrupt your company, and ultimately force Emma to liquidate assets to survive. The cruelty of it stole Alexander's breath. "She wanted to hurt Emma through me?" "Yes. Ironically, your wife's quiet strength is what foiled the entire plan. Most people in her position would have confronted you emotionally or left immediately. Instead, she investigated, documented everything, and struck at precisely the right moment to minimize damage and expose the truth." After Sarah left, Alexander sat in darkness, understanding finally washing over him. Emma hadn't just been his wife. She'd been his partner, protector, and foundation. While he'd been chasing illusions of passion, she'd been the only person truly watching his back. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Opening it, he found a single photograph. Emma, radiantly pregnant, standing before her new office with a modest sign reading, "Harrison Reed Consulting." She kept his name. The realization broke something inside him. Not hope for reconciliation. He'd destroyed that. But the last vestiges of his delusional self-importance. Emma had won completely, yet she'd chosen grace over vengeance. Alexander finally understood what he'd lost, and the weight of that knowledge would haunt him forever. Freedom and fortitude. 6 months after the gala, Emma stood in her nursery, painting the walls a soft sage green. Her pregnancy belly was unmistakable now, and she paused frequently to rest, one hand pressed against her lower back. Through the window, spring sunlight illuminated Brooklyn's tree-lined streets, a gentler world than Manhattan's glittering towers. "You're going to love it here," she whispered to her unborn daughter. The ultrasound had revealed a girl, and Emma had already chosen a name, Grace Eleanor, after her late mother and grandmother. Women who'd taught her that true strength wore soft expressions and spoke in quiet voices. Her phone rang, her assistant from Harrison Reed Consulting. "Mrs. Reed, the Pembroke account just signed. That's our 15th major client this quarter. We're going to need more office space." Emma smiled. Her firm specialized in helping businesses implement transparent financial practices and ethical partnerships. Former associates of Alexander's had initially scoffed at her naive idealism, but recent scandals had made integrity fashionable again. Companies wanted someone trustworthy managing their reputations, and Emma's story had made her the most trusted name in business consulting. "Schedule a meeting for next week," Emma instructed, "and please call me Emma." Mrs. Reed feels like someone else's life. She'd kept Alexander's surname only because divorcing while pregnant seemed complicated enough without changing documentation. Once Grace was born and custody finalized, she'd reclaim Harrison, her father's legacy and her own identity. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Alexander standing in the hallway, looking haggard and older than his years. She'd agreed to this meeting against her lawyer's advice, curious what he could possibly say after months of silence. Opening the door cautiously, Emma gestured him inside without warmth. "You have 15 minutes." Alexander's eyes immediately found her pregnancy belly, and his expression crumpled with regret so profound it was almost painful to witness. "You look beautiful," he whispered, "healthy and happy." "I'm glad. Why are you here, Alexander?" He handed her an envelope. "Revised custody paperwork. I'm signing away all parental rights except financial support." "You were right. I threw away my chance to be a father. I won't compound that mistake by forcing my presence on our daughter when I've proven I can't be trusted with what matters most." Emma opened the documents, scanning the legal language that essentially removed him from Grace's life beyond mandatory child support payments, substantially larger than court requirements. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, though relief flooded through her. "The supervised visitation we arranged would be torture for everyone involved," Alexander interrupted. "I'd spend those visits trying to prove I've changed, and she'd grow up sensing her father was there out of obligation rather than genuine love. She deserves better." "You both do." He pulled out a second envelope. "This contains stock transfers and property deeds. When I sorted through the wreckage of Bennett's scheme, I discovered she'd managed to hide assets in accounts that technically belonged to you through some legal loophole involving your father's trust. It's approximately $30 million that should have been yours all along. Your lawyers can verify everything." Emma stared at the papers, then at Alexander. "Why?" "Because you saved me from complete ruin, despite having every reason to let me burn. Because you showed more character in one night than I've demonstrated in a lifetime. Because—" His voice broke. "I finally understand what I destroyed, and I need to do at least one decent thing." Tears Emma had locked away for months suddenly surfaced, not for Alexander, but for the girl she'd been who'd loved him genuinely, and for the marriage that could have been beautiful if he'd only seen what he had. "I forgive you," she whispered, "not because you've earned it, but because I refuse to carry hatred alongside hope for our daughter's future." Alexander nodded, understanding this was goodbye in every meaningful sense. "Thank you for teaching me what strength truly means. I hope someday Grace knows what an extraordinary mother she has." After he left, Emma stood at her window, watching his figure disappear down the street, a man diminished by his own choices, walking away from the family he'd carelessly discarded. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only quiet certainty that she'd survived something that could have destroyed her. The betrayal that had shattered her world had ultimately freed her from a gilded cage she hadn't recognized as imprisonment. Placing both hands on her belly, Emma smiled as Grace kicked energetically, as if celebrating their liberation. "We're going to be just fine," Emma promised. "Better than fine. We're going to build something real, a life based on truth instead of illusions, integrity instead of appearances." Outside, cherry blossoms drifted past her window like snow, marking the end of winter and the beginning of something infinitely more precious than any fortune Alexander Reed had offered. Emma had discovered that grace and integrity were worth more than gold, that heartbreak could be the catalyst for profound transformation, and that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding someone else. It's about finding yourself and refusing to settle for anything less than you deserve. She was free, and freedom, she learned, was the most valuable treasure of all. The end.